Would you please join me in the responsive reading printed in your bulletin? Praise life and all its sources. Enter into this house which has been built for liberation. A place where your belonging is not a matter of fitting in. Welcome, friends, to Fountain Street Church. My name is Jason Hubbard. I am one of 3 clergy here at Fountain Street, and it is not for lack of another welcomer that I stand before you today. We chose quite on purpose to have me be your welcomer because the purpose of welcoming, among its liturgical values, in our community in particular, is to help you to know something about the ones who walk among you, so that when you see them, you might know something to ask them about, some way to show your interest in their days and their lives. And as it happens, I ended up having a very unexpected and extraordinary experience in the last part of my summer. And it's going to affect everything that happens in this sanctuary for the rest of the year. And so I thought it valuable, and we did as a worship planning team, for me to share just a little bit of that story, which tells something about who I am and why an experience like I've had would affect me as it has. And what I'm hopeful for is that indeed this will do the very thing we hope welcoming does every Sunday, which is invite you to a conversation with me and really even the whole liturgical experience of Sunday. As many of you know, I was raised in a tiny little United Church of Christ church in a little redwood grove south of San Francisco. My mother was my choir director. I went to church because if I didn't, it would not be a pretty Sunday afternoon. But my little church, though it taught me absolutely nothing about the Bible, taught me everything about how to belong, about where joy is, and about the value of story and festival and practice to help me to remember what is most true when I was most lost. And I've gotten lost a whole bunch. I had one of those sordid high school childhoods that mostly people don't talk about, got in a lot of trouble. I think that's influenced my ministry. I have sought experiences of challenge and trouble. For some reason, they seem full of life to me. And so I got a phone call in the early part of the summer from a woman who was organizing a couple of groups who generally don't speak to one another. One is in Jerusalem and the other in Palestine. And they had agreed to find a way to invite people of both religious and political interest to come to Palestine and Israel and to be led by each of their groups separately and together through the story of their current experience. And being someone that spent a good portion of my time in seminary worshiping in the synagogue, being one whose family practices a kind of collision-oriented spiritual religious life, we have almost every flavor of religion in our household, and none of them get along all the time. Matter of fact, some of my children practice whatever religion I don't. And as I shift, they shift. Because the holiest thing you can do is to not be like your dad. But I have to tell you, I was not prepared for what I experienced. And I won't begin to try to tell you the story of the time that I spent there, but it has broken me. I've spent a lot of time in really deeply impoverished areas. I've spent a lot of time in areas of conflict on the border of the Sonoran Desert of the United States, on Indian reservations in the heart of our country. But this was an entirely different kind of conflict. And one of the defining moments was to realize as we came closer and personally to our Palestinian guide, whose name was Amr. And the story that we became to understand from Amr, that he, as the oldest son of a 50,000 person Bedouin Palestinian tribe, was personally responsible for the life and the land of all those people. And as he led us through the most heavily militarized areas of Palestine in Hebron, he stopped in a moment and told us about his kids, who have been named after the names of Palestinian cities that no longer exist. And in that moment, I realized he had just entangled his children for whom he would die, as we all would for our children, with the land. And I was confronted in that moment by a kind of collision of hopelessness and intimacy that is terrifying, but not lost. And so what I hope is going to happen is, out of that moment, a moment which does not anymore allow me to take sides, but at the same time demands I understand the many sides that are present, that I can allow all that happened to my wife and I as we traveled through there and then on to Rome to be in front of the Pope speaking, a very progressive Pope who is now in very conflicted conversation with a very conservative Vatican. And from there, flying to Athens to witness 68% unemployment and refugees lying in the streets as we stepped over them to get onto the trains. And to see the conflict between life and liberty, land. And I'm gonna hope, because there is still hope in my great brokenness, that it can speak to us through the experiences we share together on Sundays. Not that I'm going to offer you a travelogue, but that the language of conflict and restoration, of death and life again, is going to become evident to us all through what has happened to me. The first place that you're going to see that I want to give you a heads up about, and that's one of the reasons for my welcome this morning. We have a beautiful call to worship, sung invitation, as you'll see printed in your bulletin this morning, from our choir, who actually foreshadowed the music we sang together. It's a beautiful tradition, and it's one which has gone on here for many years. But one of the things that struck us very powerfully in the old city of Jerusalem was that you could be walking through the Jewish quarter, and the Muslim azan, the call to worship, would come over the city. It was inescapable. It was in the rocks. So even the sound of the world begged a kind of conflict that I've never quite experienced before. And so next Sunday, we are going to play for you the azan from Mecca as a call to worship here. And I hope that it haunts you. I hope that you'll come just to hear that and everything that follows. And that you will hear through our practice with the call to worship some of the working out and the invitation and the promise of just this tiniest little bit of our liturgy. That it might become richer and deeper and beg more questions and conversations of your lives, because it certainly has in mine. And I hope that as you hear these things and experience them, that we'll be in conversation after church while we eat donuts and cider, and that we'll get to know each other better by finding this common ground of exploring something so powerful that I think indeed we can all benefit from exploring together. Friends, this is Fountain Street Church, a place where you are not simply welcomed, but really invited to free your mind, to grow your soul, and thereby change the world. May it be so that this is our work today. Welcome to Fountain Street Church.
For Jason mentioned in the early worship that today is today your mother's birthday? It is wonderful. It's also my parents' anniversary. We value those recollections, don't we? We value those moments when we are called back to a spot in time. Birthdays, anniversaries, commemorations. I call to mind John Crawford III, whom you don't know, who was of Beaverbrook, Ohio, because in August of last year, of 2014, during the time when we are not ordinarily in this house, he was fatally shot while carrying a pellet gun in Walmart. You may have seen the news story. The gun was unsold merchandise and out of its package. A man named Ronald Ritchie called 911 and said that he looked like he was pointing it at people, but a month later, Mr. Crawford admitted he was not pointing the gun at people. Nonetheless, the police came and perceived it to be a deadly threat and killed him in Walmart. He was a man of color. It is my intent to lift up a name of someone who perished as a result of, shall we say, the unfortunate patterns, practices, and habits our policing has inculcated in recent years. It is no criticism of those who feel fear or those who are trying in earnest to do their duty, but a lifting up of the consequences of things that we do not think nearly enough about. In the Christian church this morning, there are passages being read, including two which I will give you now. One is from the book of Proverbs. Wisdom cries out in the street, in the squares, she raises her voice. At the busiest corner she cries out, at the entrance of the city gates she speaks. How long, O simple ones? How long will you love being simple? How long will scoffers delight in their scoffing and fools hate knowledge? That's a 3,000-year-old text. I think it's still worth saying again, don't you? Reminding people like me and others of the season that it is, James, the brother of Jesus, writes in his letter, "Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers and sisters, for you know that we who teach will be judged by greater strictness, but all of us make many mistakes." And so to preach. What a curious word it is to preach, to proclaim, to say a word perhaps of hope, of truth, some proclamation that has not been heard or one that deserves to be reheard. But I'll start in a more modest location to tell you that while I was in China back in April and May, it was not the Great Wall as majestic as it was, or the terracotta warriors as imposing as they were, that got to me. It was a single pile of dirt. Oh yeah, there was a slab in front, so I knew it was a significant pile of dirt. And yes, there was an altar in front of the slab, but together the altar and the slab did not equal the size of the mound of dirt. It was just a mound. Well, it had grass on top of it. It was not just dirt. But somewhere inside that grassy mound that stood maybe 8 or 10 feet tall and was maybe 30 feet in diameter, somewhere in there were the remains, if any, of Kung Fu Ji, better known in English as Confucius. Now, I'm not a Confucian scholar. I barely know one analect from another. But what imposed itself upon me was that he had been buried since the year 479 before Jesus. Okay, so he died before Jesus was born. He died before Socrates was born. He died before the Torah was written down. He died when Rome was just a village getting its steam up. And all there, I stood there and saw all those centuries in that mound of dirt with grass on top. All of history rendered by a pile of dirt. I love ancient things. I really do. The older I get, the more I love them. I tell people when I go traveling, I love to see anything that's older than me. I have over the years scrambled over the Acropolis and the remains of Mycenae. I have walked along the Appian Way. I have traversed the whole of Hadrian's Wall in England. I have beheld the pyramids not of Egypt but of Teotihuacan and the ruins of Mesa Verde. Why? Why do I like these things so much? One word: perspective. Nothing humbles you more than seeing things from a new perspective. If you have beheld the Grand Canyon, you get a new perspective on what deep really is. More prosaically, when you look out on Lake Michigan or on the Atlantic or the Pacific, you get a new perspective on what wide open really is. The Rockies or the Andes give you a new perspective on what high really is. And when you see the grave of Confucius, you get a new perspective on what old really is. They all put you in your place, remind you that the world is much taller, deeper, wider, and older than I or you will ever be. There are also these are the places and experiences that people will also say are the most moving, or even spiritual, when we see these majestic natural locations or these ancient human sites. I think there is a connection. That sense of perspective is part of the spiritual experience that we appreciate. The word that connects the sense of perspective with the spirituality part is the word awe, A-W-E. I think that word, sadly, has been downgraded now. Whenever anything is okay, we just say, awesome, man. And I want to say, it's not awesome. It isn't even close to awesome. You can say it, but that's not what you mean. Awe is when you look at the grave of Confucius. Awe is when you look over the edge of the Grand Canyon. Awe is when you look up at Mount Everest. You go, oh, you feel a sense of enormousness and your own itty-bittiness. That's awe. And part of that is a sense of genuine, true, honest, authentic humility. Whatever is awesome, you ain't. That's the key. That's what spiritual means. You get put in your place and you're okay with that. In fact, you want more of that. You want to have more moments when you can feel the real awe, not the awesome. When you are reminded and enjoy and appreciate and cherish that sense of smallness in the immensity of being. Many years ago, back in my seminary days, I met and learned from and read the work of a man named James Luther Adams. He was a Unitarian and a Universalist, but he grew up in a rural evangelical home in Washington State, eastern Washington State, not the green and pleasant part, the dry and dusty part. And he recalled a moment in his childhood, in his evangelical childhood, when a terrible sandstorm came and his father, who was a preacher, predicted that this was the end times. He was a boy, and he was convinced that that storm was going to obliterate the world. If we know people who have been in hurricanes, floods, that's the same kind of moment. That's perspective of an whole other kind. And when he grew up to become a scholar and a teacher of other liberal religious clergy and thinkers, I was obliged and glad to encounter his insights born of that and other experiences, including his long questioning by the Gestapo before they let him leave for England without some of his friends. One of his insights was that liberalism in general, religious and secular, must be, as our Reformed cousins say of themselves, reformed and ever reforming. Liberal religion, too, like anything else, can stiffen and settle into a formula that becomes rote and even dogmatic. The words of Jesus in today's gospel portion are a universal example of what happens. In Mark, it says, "Those who want to save their life will lose it. Those who lose their life for my sake will save it. For what will it profit them to gain the world and lose their life?" We all want the breathtaking moments of cosmic perspective, to feel humble before the height and breadth and depth of ultimate things. That's why you're in church. But we all settle for something far less. A comfortable something, a comforting something that forgives our cautions and compliments our good taste. Conservatives and liberals both compromise all the time. We want the majesty, but we'll settle for the might. We want the spirituality, but we'll settle for the sensation. Like Esau in the Torah, we sell our birthright for spiritual liveliness, for spiritual ecstasy, for spiritual life itself. We will sell it for the pottage of spiritual comfort and convenience. All of us. But I was talking about James Luther Adams. Let me get back to my point. Those words that I read, he wrote in 1950-something, and they goaded me then in 1976 to question my liberal religion. So you need to know some of those words. He wrote, "No philosophy of life, no religion can remain viable unless it possesses a sense of depth, of breadth, and of length in time." And that phrase, that idea has never left me. It has stuck with me for over 40 years because as much as I think I'm making progress, I have not. I settle for the formulaic, the obvious, the rote, the convenient, and the safe. So this fall, I'm going to try to push my own envelope, to press a little further down the paths of length and breadth and depth. And I want you to come along on a journey, a pilgrimage of sorts, to connect with the deeper, wider, and taller realities of life. You've all felt it at least once, or you wouldn't be in this room. You've said, "That's what I want to be. I want to be that more often. Fountain Street Church will let me do that." And yes, we will. But we don't make you do that. And maybe we should. Because we all flinch from the precipice. We go up to the Grand Canyon and look over and go, "I'm not going there again." We all see Everest and say, "Have a good luck with that climb." We all come up to someone important to us whose love or approval is important, and then we don't say the words we want for fear of being hurt. We all do it. Every one of us. And I'm not calling that sin. I'm calling you human. But maybe if I do it and you watch, you can take a step in that direction. I want us all to touch again the Spirit that touched you at least once in your life, that touched this church from time to time in its history, folded it over into a new chapter, and touched our nation from time to time when it was at its best self. It will be demanding and humbling and revealing, as all pilgrimages, am I right, Jason? As all pilgrimages are, speaking of your own. When I say we, I mean me. And I am also mindful of those words from James, that not many should be teachers, for all of us make many mistakes. So maybe it will be my mistakes that teach more than my learnings. But I was among the ruins, remember? I was among the ruins. I need to go back there. Figurative and literal cemeteries of life. It is here that I experience the sense of length of years of time. Somewhere I heard the ironic observation, and I looked it up, it's by Earl Hitchner, that the difference between America and England is that Americans think 100 years is a long time, and the English think 100 miles is a long way. And there is truth to that, the first part especially. I believe our nation is temporally myopic. That is to say, if it didn't happen yesterday or the day before or in my life, it doesn't matter. The new is always better than the old. That's important. We live in a society, an economy that says whatever you own now, you'd better buy a new one before it gets too old. We always want the now. We always want the new. The old is whatever wasn't there when I showed up. And it's gone. It's past. It's dead. It's done with. Who needs it? History is just that. It's a book you read on the beach if you're lucky. History is by definition over. After all, gather ye rosebuds while ye may. We are the living. It's up to us. But how much of now do we really know about? How much of now is there really? The part that started this sermon is now in history, along with Confucius. Does now exist right now, or is it between this now and next now? Is it between the tick and the tock? If you think about it, now is impossible to name. I can sense it, but I can't grab it. Unless, and here's the place where we're going to get really very funky. What if there is nothing other than now, ever? There's only now, and there always was a now, there always will be a now. There is only the present. We're just not smart enough to catch it all. We're not big enough. The theologian Paul Tillich wrote, "Every moment of time reaches into the eternal. It is the eternal that stops the flux of time as we see it. It is the eternal now which provides us with the temporal now," the temporal meaning temporary. What seems to us fleeting, this is me now, what seems to us the fleeting moment, the passage of time, is just that, a seeming. It's the limits of our brains and minds to think this moment and that moment and that moment, that it's a year and it's a tick and a tock and then we're getting old. All of those things are a seeming because our minds, our souls are not big enough to take it all in. To think that this hour right now that I am preaching means anything is a monument to my self-importance. That you're here thinking I am saying anything meaningful is a monument to your self-importance. We are naive to think that the past is irrelevant or the future, it doesn't matter. It is the limits of our minds to think that we, of all creatures, outrank every other creature that ever was and ever will be. See, that's why ruins put me in my place. They shut me up. Crawling over the stones of Mycenae, I think, who am I to be in the presence of Agamemnon when he launched the Trojan War from within these walls? Beholding the terracotta army of Xi'an, I thought, China was born in this dirt. Who am I to behold them? In the Roman Forum years ago, there were little gouges like cups that had been worn out of the marble stone by men who sat on the steps waiting to be called for jury duty. And you can see them today. In fact, you can reach over, and as I did, I touched them. And at that moment, that Roman was as present to me as I was. We pride ourselves, we religious liberals, on being more open to truth than those who enclose it in books and dogmas. And we should be proud of that. But in truth, we can be as conservative as any of them, making narrow, naive, and ultimately arrogant caricatures of our best selves. I was reminded of that when I read beyond the part I cited before, when James Luther Adams talks about the loss of dimension. Here's the problem he's naming. Liberalism as individualism has served as a smokescreen, he writes, an ideology concealing or protecting a new authoritarianism of corporate economic power. He's writing in the 1950s. Let me read that to you again, because if you're hearing Bernie Sanders' voice, this is not Bernie Sanders. Protecting a new authoritarianism of corporate economic power. This idolatry in the name of individualism and the free market, he even writes it in quotes, eschews responsibility for the consequences of economic power. It has become virtually unaccountable to the general public. He's writing in 1950, describing 2015. And I ask myself, how have I successfully avoided dealing with that for my entire life? The voice has been in front of me. Jim Adams has been telling me since 1976, beware the devil in the details here. He goes on, what began as a liberating individualism became a pervasive conglomeration of power, a new absolute. I had let my liberal religion devolve, fall apart, shrink, lose its dimensions into I get to be the boss of me, you get to be the boss of you, and whatever happens is just going to have to be okay. Have we not all been guilty of a little bit of that convenient individualism from time to time? Raise your hand if you disagree. It was, for me, when I reread it this week, a moment of grace. Grace usually sounds like a blessing. Oh, I've been graced with this. I've been graced. No, sometimes a grace is a slap on the head. Wake up! Open your eyes. It is a goad, a reminder that the liberal spirit we think we belong to demands not just our individual liberation, but liberation for all. Not just justice for me and my life, but justice for all. Not just hope for me and my career, but hope for everyone and all their lives. If I stop at my spiritual good, I am treating my faith as a possession, something the result of my shrewd bargaining skills in the free market of religions. But the liberal spirit in religion is not mine to own. It isn't yours to buy. It isn't ours to brag about. It is no one's possession any more than my life is mine or that my time is mine. I forgot the humbleness that comes when the Spirit comes over you and says, know your place. Be aware. Several times in the Bible, we hear someone ask, as you heard this morning, how long? How long, matai in Hebrew? How long will this last? In 1965, Martin Luther King reached the end of his march from Selma to Montgomery, and he spoke on that very phrase. He says, I know you're asking today, how long will it take? He goes on. Somebody's asking, how long will prejudice blind the visions of men, darken their understanding, and drive bright-eyed wisdom from her sacred throne? Oh, I wish I could speak like that. Somebody's asking, he said, when will wounded justice lying prostrate on the streets of Selma and Birmingham and communities all over the South be lifted from the dust of shame to reign supreme over the children of men? Why can't I preach like that? Why can't I be like that, I think? How long will justice be crucified and truth bear it? These words seared into me when I read them just this week. He continues, I come to say to you this afternoon, however difficult the moment, however frustrating the hour, it will not be long, because no lie can live forever. How long? Not long, because you shall reap what you sow. How long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. That was 50 years ago, and we're not there yet, and it's because I and everyone else has said, let's take a little longer, shall we? I'm not ready to go that deep. I'm not ready to be that broad-minded. I'm not ready to be that spiritual. It takes too much work. I might actually have to change. And yet, God's have mercy upon me for saying it, I want a faith like that. Do you? I want a liberating faith that truly believes it will not be long before truth and love and justice come to rule our hearts and minds. However long is, we should believe it is not long, and that the next step is the step that must be taken. I can't speak for you, seek a faith. Yeah, I do speak for you. I seek a faith, a liberating faith that owns me and puts me in my place and puts me at the service to hope and love and justice, and not to my job and to the reports and to the showing up and looking like a clergyman. I seek a faith, a liberating faith that knows the true peace of the eternal now, and so do you. Augustine once famously said, Lord, give me chastity, but not yet. For the liberal, it is, Lord, God, give us faith, but not quite yet. Because then I'll have to do something about it. Then I'll have to act upon it. Then I'll have to violate the norms and the rules. I'll have to miss the deadlines and fail to file the reports and say the things that offend people who write checks. How long? Not long. If I start today. If I start today. May the words of my mouth, the meditations of my heart be found true in thy sight and in my life. Thou who art my rock and my Redeemer.